I still remember the first time I saw one. It was late, well past midnight, and I was just trying to get a glass of water. The house was absolutely silent, every creak and groan amplified by the oppressive darkness. As I walked down the hallway, I felt it, that familiar, icy prickle on the back of my neck. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination playing tricks. But then, as I passed the bathroom door, out of the very corner of my eye, I saw it. A shape, taller than any man, darker than the deepest void, a hole in the light itself. It was gone as soon as I snapped my head around, dissolving back into the gloom like smoke. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum in the silence. I knew what I saw wasn't just a trick of the light. It was something else, something watching me, and it wasn't the last time. The memory of that night, that impossible shape in the hallway, burned itself into my mind. Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside my window sent a jolt of ice through my veins. I'd lie awake for hours, staring into the oppressive darkness of my bedroom, convinced that if I just looked hard enough, I'd see it again. My eyes would play tricks on me, turning coats on chairs into looming figures, shadows cast by streetlights into gaunt, silent watchers. I started leaving lights on, small nightlights in the hallway, a lamp in the living room. It was a childish fear, I told myself, a silly reaction to an overactive imagination, but the primal dread that gripped me was anything but childish. It was raw, immediate, and utterly convincing. Days blurred into a haze of exhaustion and hypervigilance. I'd catch myself glancing over my shoulder in broad daylight, my breath catching in my throat as a fleeting shadow darted across my peripheral vision. Always just out of direct sight, always gone the moment I turned to confront it. My friends noticed I was quieter, more withdrawn. I tried to explain it once, tentatively, to my closest friend, but the words felt absurd even to me. I think I saw something, like a really tall shadow. The look of polite concern, mixed with a hint of confusion, was enough to make me retreat. How could I articulate the absolute certainty that it was real, that it was watching? Then came the second time, and it was far less ambiguous. I was in the kitchen, making coffee, the morning sun streaming through the window, painting warm stripes across the floor. A sense of peace, however fleeting, had settled over me. I turned to grab a mug from the cupboard, and as I did, my gaze drifted towards the open doorway leading to the dining room. There it was. Not a trick of the light, not a fleeting glimpse this time. It stood perfectly still, just inside the dining room, silhouetted against the slightly dimmer light of that room. It was the same impossible height, the same profound blackness that seemed to absorb all light around it. But this time, it felt clearer. I couldn't make out features, not really, but there was a distinct impression of a head, shoulders, and a slender, almost elongated body. It wasn't just a void, it was a figure. My heart seized in my chest. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt heavy, thick, and impossibly cold, despite the morning sun. I couldn't move. My hands, still reaching for the mug, were frozen in place. My breath hitched, caught somewhere between my lungs and my throat. It didn't move. It just stood there, observing. And for the first time, I felt something more profound than just fear. I felt a chilling, undeniable presence. It wasn't just a random occurrence. It was aware of me. It was looking at me. Its silent gaze, though featureless, felt like a physical weight pressing down on my very soul. A cold dread seeped into my bones, a terrifying realization that this wasn't just a one-off hallucination. This was real, and it was here, with me. I don't know how long we stood there, locked in that silent, terrifying tableau. It could have been seconds. It felt like an eternity. My mind screamed at me to run, to scream, to do anything, but my body was paralyzed. All I could do was stare at that impossible darkness, that hole in reality, and feel its unseen eyes bore into me. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it began to recede. Not moving, not walking away, but simply fading, like a shadow lengthening and dissolving back into the ambient gloom of the dining room. The blackness thinned, the edges blurred, and then it was gone. Just an empty doorway filled with the ordinary light of morning. But the coldness lingered, an invisible residue in the air, and the imprint of its silent watch was burned onto my psyche. I dropped the mug. It shattered on the floor, the sudden noise echoing like a gunshot in the suddenly silent kitchen. My knees buckled, and I slid down the cabinets, shaking uncontrollably, tears silently streaming down my face. It wasn't just my imagination. It was real, and it knew I could see it. The floor was cold beneath me, the broken ceramic shards glinting innocently in the morning sun. I didn't care about the mess or the coffee I'd never made. All I could feel was the icy grip of fear twisting my stomach into knots. It wasn't just a shadow. It was a presence, a malevolent, silent witness that had been observing me, knowing I was there. The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. My mind raced, trying to find an explanation, any explanation, that didn't involve a towering, featureless entity standing in my dining room. Sleep deprivation, stress, a waking nightmare? But the cold, the absolute certainty, the way it had looked at me without eyes, it defied all logic. I somehow managed to drag myself up, my legs still trembling. My first instinct was to flee, to run out of the house, get in my car, and drive until I couldn't remember where I was. But where would I go? It had been inside my home, my sanctuary. If it could be there, it could be anywhere. The world outside suddenly felt just as vulnerable, just as permeable to whatever it was. I cleaned up the broken mug mechanically, my hands still shaking so badly I nearly dropped the broom. Every rustle of the plastic dustpan, every clink of ceramic made me jump. I found myself checking every corner, every doorway, my eyes darting nervously, expecting to see that impossible shape again. The morning sun, which had felt so comforting moments before, now seemed to cast too many shadows, creating too many hiding places. The days that followed were a living nightmare. The fear had shifted from a vague unease to a constant gnawing terror. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, not just when I was alone, but even when I was with people. I'd be in a crowded store, and suddenly the air would go cold, a shiver would run down my spine, and I'd instinctively scan the periphery of my vision, convinced I'd catch a glimpse of that profound darkness just at the edge of the crowd. I started spending hours online, late into the night, typing desperate phrases into search engines. Tall shadow figure, black entity in house, feeling watched by unseen presence. And that's when I found them, the stories. Hundreds, thousands of them. People describing almost exactly what I had experienced. The height, the profound blackness, the feeling of being observed, the way they dissolved. They called them shadow people. The term itself sent a chill down my spine. It gave a name to my terror, and with a name came a terrifying validation. I wasn't going crazy. Other people had seen them. But what were they? The theories were endless. Interdimensional beings, residual energy, spiritual entities, sleep paralysis hallucinations. None of them brought me comfort. In fact, knowing that this wasn't an isolated incident, that it was a phenomenon, only deepened my dread. It meant this wasn't a mistake, a random occurrence. It meant they were here, and they were interacting, observing, and now they knew I could see them. My life became a constant exercise in vigilance.
I stopped sleeping almost entirely. The nightlights I'd put up before felt pitifully inadequate. I'd sit up in bed, my heart thudding, staring into the gloom, convinced that any moment that familiar darkness would coalesce in the corner of my room.
Sometimes I'd swear I'd see a flicker, a momentary deepening of the shadows just beyond my direct line of sight, a fleeting sense of movement in the hallway, a faint, almost imperceptible chill passing through the room. They weren't full appearances, not like that second time, but they were there, whispering at the edges of my perception, a constant reminder of their presence. They were testing me, waiting. And I knew, with a certainty that froze me to my core, that it was only a matter of time before they showed themselves again. The weeks that followed were a descent into a waking nightmare. My exhaustion wasn't just physical, it was soul-deep. The lines between reality and hallucination blurred. Every shadow was suspect, every sound a potential harbinger of their return. The subtle movements I'd previously dismissed as flickers became more deliberate. I'd catch them in reflections, in the glass of a picture frame, a momentary distortion of the light that was unmistakably the familiar, impossible void. They were no longer content to just be on the periphery. They were pushing closer. The cold spots became more frequent, more intense. I'd be sitting at my desk, and suddenly the air beside me would drop to an arctic chill, raising goosebumps on my skin. It felt like an invisible presence had just manifested, breathing its icy breath down my neck. I'd whip my head around, only to find nothing but empty air, though the cold lingered, a phantom limb of their proximity. Sometimes I'd swear I could hear something, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper carried on that unnatural cold, too soft to decipher, but enough to make the hairs on my arms stand on end. It was like they were trying to communicate, or perhaps just to torment me. My sanctuary, my home, had become a cage. I felt constantly observed, a specimen under a microscope. I'd pace from room to room, my eyes scanning, searching, desperate to catch them in the act, to prove to myself I wasn't losing my mind. But they were too clever, too elusive. They were everywhere and nowhere, masters of the unseen. Sleep offered no escape. It became the most terrifying part of my day. I dreaded closing my eyes, knowing what might be waiting for me when I opened them again. I'd try to stay awake, propped up in bed, but eventually exhaustion would win, dragging me down into a shallow, restless slumber. It happened one night, perhaps a month after the kitchen incident. I'd finally succumbed to sleep, the TV murmuring softly in the background, a desperate attempt to fill the oppressive silence. I woke with a jolt, not from a noise, but from an overwhelming sense of dread. My eyes snapped open, and for a long moment I lay perfectly still, my heart hammering against my ribs, convinced I was still dreaming. But the cold was real. It was a suffocating blanket pressing down on me, radiating from the foot of my bed. And then I saw it. Not in the corner of the room, not a fleeting glimpse in a reflection. It was standing directly at the foot of my bed. Taller than the ceiling, it seemed to bend slightly to accommodate the space, its profound blackness absorbing the faint light from the TV. It was the same impossible height, the same absolute void. But this time, it was different. It wasn't just observing. It felt like it was leaning over me, its presence pressing down, a suffocating weight on my chest. I couldn't breathe. My throat was suddenly dry, constricted. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped. Its form, though featureless, felt intensely focused on me. I couldn't see eyes, but I felt them boring into my very soul, a silent, predatory gaze. It was closer than it had ever been, so close I could almost feel the unnatural cold emanating from it. This wasn't a casual visit. This was an inspection, a profound, chilling curiosity. My entire body trembled, not just from fear, but from the bone-deep cold that seemed to emanate from its very being. I felt like I was being drained, my warmth, my energy, my very life force being siphoned away by its silent presence. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, it began to shift. Not moving its feet, but its form seemed to ripple like smoke in a gentle breeze. The edges of its impossible blackness seemed to stretch, to waver, almost as if it was trying to expand, to fill the entire room, to consume me. It was a slow, terrifying transformation, a silent assertion of its power. I squeezed my eyes shut, desperate to make it disappear, to believe it was a nightmare. When I dared to open them again, it was gone. The cold lingered, an icy footprint on my soul, but the figure itself had vanished. I lay there, gasping for air, tears streaming down my temples, the TV's soft murmur now a mocking lullaby. It had been in my bedroom, watching me sleep, and it was no longer content to just watch. I lay there, gasping for air, tears streaming down my temples, the TV's soft murmur now a mocking lullaby. It had been in my bedroom, watching me sleep, and it was no longer content to just watch. The figure was gone, but the impression remained. My body was still locked in terror. The cold, that bone-deep, unnatural cold, was still there, seeping into my very core. I finally managed to sit up, my head swimming. The TV was still on, its light doing little to dispel the profound sense of violation that permeated the room. It had been in my sanctuary. It had been over me. This wasn't just a haunting, it was an invasion. Sleep was utterly impossible now. I spent the rest of the night huddled in a corner of my living room, the main lights blazing, a heavy blanket wrapped around me, a useless barrier against the unseen. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every creak of the old house was a potential movement. I kept my eyes fixed on the doorways, my breath shallow, waiting for that impossible blackness to coalesce again. It didn't, not that night. But the dread was a tangible thing, a weight pressing down on me, suffocating me. The next few days were a blur of sheer panic and exhaustion. I couldn't stay in that house. I tried, I really did. But every room felt tainted, every corner held the memory of its presence. I'd walk into the kitchen and remember it standing in the dining room doorway. I'd try to sleep in my bed and feel the phantom cold radiating from its spot at the foot. I packed a small bag, just essentials, and fled. I drove aimlessly, eventually checking into a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. I thought a change of scenery, a neutral space, might offer some respite. I was wrong. The motel room, with its anonymous decor and thin walls, offered no comfort. If anything, the unfamiliarity amplified my terror. I found myself checking behind the curtains, under the bed, in the small closet. Every noise from the hallway made me jump. I tried to convince myself that I was safe, that it couldn't follow me. But that chilling certainty, that it knew I could see it, that it was aware of me, gnawed at my resolve. They were masters of the unseen. If they could manifest in my home, why not here? The cold spots started appearing in the motel room, not as intense as in my house, but distinctly there. A sudden chill in the air beside the bed, a pocket of Arctic cold near the bathroom door. I'd spin around, my heart pounding, but there would be nothing, just empty space, yet the cold would linger. And then came the whispers. Faint, indistinct, like static on an old radio, but undeniably there, just at the edge of my hearing. They weren't words, not exactly, but a low, guttural murmur that seemed to coil around my thoughts, filling them with a profound sense of unease. It felt like they were trying to communicate, or perhaps just to invade my mind, to chip away at my sanity. I barely slept. When I did, the nightmares were vivid, terrifying.
I'd dream of being swallowed by an infinite blackness, of faceless figures surrounding me, their silent gazes pressing down until I couldn't breathe. I'd wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, convinced I could still feel the cold, still hear the whispers. My reflection in the mirror showed a haunted, gaunt face, eyes wide and bloodshot, dark circles beneath them. I was losing myself. This wasn't just about fear anymore. It was about survival.
One evening, I was sitting on the edge of the motel bed, trying to read a book, anything to distract myself. The TV was on low, a bland sitcom playing. Suddenly, the air in the room dropped significantly. Not just a chill, but a deep, penetrating cold that made my teeth chatter. My breath plumed in front of me. I froze, my eyes darting frantically around the room. The TV screen flickered, the picture distorting for a split second, then returning to normal. And then I saw it. In the reflection of the dark TV screen, just behind my shoulder, a faint, shimmering outline. It wasn't the profound blackness I was used to, but a translucent, almost watery distortion of the air, shaped like a man, impossibly tall. It was closer than I'd ever felt it before, right behind me. I could feel the cold radiating from it, a physical pressure against my back. And then I saw it. The whispers, they were louder now, a low, rasping sound that seemed to vibrate through my very bones. I didn't dare turn around. I just stared at its distorted reflection, paralyzed, waiting for it to move, waiting for it to do something. My breath plumed in front of my face, a stark white cloud in the frigid air of the motel room. The sitcom on the TV flickered, its cheerful laughter suddenly grotesque, swallowed by the unnatural silence that descended. The light from the screen seemed to dim, as if struggling to penetrate the oppressive darkness that was now coalescing in the corner of the room. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. It was a tear in the fabric of reality itself, a deeper blackness that seemed to suck all light and warmth into its core. I couldn't move, my muscles locked, my gaze riveted to the expanding void. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the suffocating silence. It grew, stretching upwards, taller than the ceiling, wider than the wall, its form vaguely human, but impossibly distorted. It was the same entity, I knew it, the same one that had stood at the foot of my bed, but this time it felt angrier, more potent. The cold intensified, piercing through my clothes, chilling me to the bone, a pain deep within my marrow. Then it started to move, not walking, not gliding, but shifting, rippling like oil in water. It detached itself from the corner, flowing across the floor towards me with a terrifying speed that defied logic. The air crackled with an unseen energy, and the whispers, those faint, guttural murmurs, swelled into a chorus, a cacophony of unintelligible sounds that clawed at my sanity. They weren't just in my ears, they were inside my head, echoing, twisting, planting seeds of pure, unadulterated terror. I didn't dare scream. My mouth opened, but no sound came out, only a dry, desperate gasp. My lungs burned, starved for air that felt thick and heavy, like liquid lead. The entity was upon me now, looming over the bed, its colossal form eclipsing the flickering TV, plunging the room into near total darkness. I could feel its presence, a crushing weight, a pressure so immense it felt like my very soul was being squeezed. And then It reached out, not with a hand, not with anything discernible, but with a tendril of pure shadow, a long, slender extension of its form that seemed to stretch from its core. It moved with an agonizing slowness, a deliberate, predatory grace. I could feel the cold radiating from it, an absolute zero that threatened to freeze my blood in my veins. It hovered inches from my face, a void within a void, a swirling vortex of nothingness. I squeezed my eyes shut, a desperate, childish attempt to make it disappear, to deny its existence. But the whispers intensified, drilling into my mind, and the cold, oh God, the cold, it was unbearable. It felt like it was inside me, invading every cell, every nerve ending. My body began to shake uncontrollably, a violent tremor that started in my core and spread outwards. Then I felt it. A touch, not physical, not a solid object, but a piercing, invasive sensation, like an ice pick driven into my forehead. It wasn't pain, not exactly, but a violation, a searing cold that went straight into my brain. And with that touch, the whispers became clear. Not words, but images, flashes, horrific, distorted visions of my worst fears, of grotesque faces, of endless, suffocating darkness. It was showing me things, infecting my mind, trying to break me. I thrashed, finally finding a desperate strength born of pure terror. My limbs flailed, pushing against the unseen force, but it was like fighting against smoke. The shadow tendril pressed deeper, and I felt a scream tearing through my throat, a raw, primal sound that was finally unleashed. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated agony and terror, a sound ripped from the deepest parts of my being. The scream, though ragged and hoarse, seemed to have an effect. The tendril recoiled, a sudden, almost violent snap back towards the main form. The crushing pressure eased, and the whispers, though still present, receded slightly. The colossal shadow figure seemed to pause. It didn't retreat, not entirely, but it held its ground, its form still looming, still absorbing the light. I lay there, gasping, my body trembling uncontrollably, tears streaming down my face. My throat was raw, my head pounded, and the icy violation still lingered in my mind, a phantom sensation. I opened my eyes cautiously. The entity was still there, but it was no longer reaching for me. It was observing. Its featureless head seemed to tilt, an impression of dark curiosity. It had tested me, it had invaded me, and now it knew. It knew my fears, it knew my breaking point. Slowly, deliberately, it began to recede.
Not fading this time, but drawing back, its immense form shrinking, contracting, until it was once again a profound blackness in the corner of the room. The cold, though still present, lessened its suffocating grip. The whispers faded back to a faint murmur, a distant echo in the silence. And then, with a final, almost imperceptible shimmer, it was gone. The motel room was still. The sitcom on the TV played on, its cheerful laughter now a stark contrast to the terror that had just unfolded. I was alone, but I wasn't. The cold lingered, a chilling reminder. The violation was etched into my mind. I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that this wasn't over. It had left its mark, and it would be back. My sanctuary was gone. My mind was compromised. There was no escape. That night in the motel room, it was the end of everything I thought I knew. The touch, that invasive cold that burrowed into my mind, it left something behind. The whispers are always there now, a low, guttural hum just beneath the surface of my thoughts. A constant reminder of what it showed me, of my deepest fears laid bare, of the knowledge it now possesses about my very soul. I never went back to my house. I couldn't. Every corner, every shadow held a memory of its presence, a phantom cold that would never truly dissipate. I drift now, from place to place, never staying long, never feeling truly safe. The world has become a vast, open prison. Where do you go when the threat isn't just outside, but inside your own head? When the darkness you fear is a shadow you carry within? Sleep is a luxury I no longer afford, a battlefield where my nightmares are not just dreams, but vivid, terrifying replays of its invasion. I wake gasping, drenched in sweat, the cold still clinging to my skin, the whispers still echoing. Every shadow is suspect, every unexplained chill a jolt of ice through my veins. I catch myself scanning the periphery, always looking, always expecting to see that impossible blackness coalesce again. I still don't know what they are or what they want. Why me? Why are they here? But I know they are real, and they are everywhere. They don't need to manifest fully to be present. Their presence is a cold, suffocating blanket that never truly lifts, a constant gnawing dread that has become my new normal. I'm sharing my story because I need to know I'm not alone in this. Have you ever felt it? That icy prickle, that fleeting shadow at the edge of your vision, that profound sense of being watched when no one is there. Have you ever had a nightmare that felt too real, a chill that lingered long after the warmth should have returned? Because once you truly see them, once they know you can see them, they never really leave. They just wait and watch.
And you'll always feel their shadow, even in the brightest light.